Again, Steve here with another sharing of a few thoughts. I'm reading this book currently. It's called Inner Strength, and it's by a guy named Jesse Lee, and it comes from the Buddhist the teachings of the Buddha perspective. And he talks in here about the body and the mind a lot, and then they talk about the heart. And I think sometimes in reading different perspectives on, human growth, personal growth, psychology, whatever it is, that we'll find that people use different terminologies for different things. But yet at the same time, if we look at it, we realize, oh, okay, I get it. Now, something like the body, okay, that's pretty hard to confuse, right? And even so much the mind. But then we hear that other aspect of us thing, that emotional thing, that soul thing, that heart thing, whatever it is. I think that kind of gets bantied around quite a bit. But I think very, very important. And because it's kind of like there's the empirical world, right? And then there's the objective world. Like the body is kind of objective, right? But then there's that subjective side. And to truly live, I think we have to have kind of like almost like one foot in one world and one in the other. There's our creative, our subjective part of ourselves, and there's the objective part of ourselves. And in this book, as well as the last book I read, they talk about the importance of self-examination to the point of what is more consistent, what is not more consistent. And then they talk about the last book that I read was selves and not self. So the idea was to a lot of focus on not self, because a lot of times in life we focus on things that are impermanent, and if we focus on things that are impermanent, it's kind of a letdown, because we put a lot of investment into something and then it's going. It's like the body, right? We can put a lot of investment into it. Suppose you're a bodybuilder or a supermodel or whatever, and then all of a sudden the body is declining and turning into something that you don't want. Well, if there's an attachment to that, then it's great suffering, because that's an impermanence. It keeps on wasting away. And the same with mental constructs and so on. So they talk a lot about fabrications, and not so much hanging on to the fabrications, but trying to identify with what is more permanent. And I think this just shows up in religions too. They talk about soul as the permanence. And a lot of times in these different writings, depending on where they're coming from, if they're Christianity or if they're philosophy or if they're from ancient Buddhist texts or whatever, it seems like the solution is in the permanence, not in the impermanence, to our long-term happiness. And even some people even use the word salvation. I think that's really quality of life, right? Quality of our existence, quality of our happiness, our fulfillment, is where that salvation is, right? Because if we're enjoying life, we don't feel like we have to be saved. But if we're really in a lot of pain, it feels like we have to be saved, right? If you're really really sick and you got to go to the doctor, you're looking for some sort of salvation in that moment. So along that line, right? It's not. I don't think it's nailing anything down to something. Oh, salvation is this particular deity's version of it. It's our interpretation of it in terms of what that is, I think. Now, I was listening to an interview by a guy, and I highly recommend checking into some of this guy's stuff. I think he's spot on in a lot of ways. His name is Jesse Lee Peterson, and he's a guy in the U.S. who's very concerned about what's happened in the black community. He's a black guy, he's a reverend, and he does a radio talk show, but it's a lot of it's just very practical stuff rather than so much religious stuff. But what he talks about is that there's the tendency of, in the black community, due to the propaganda and so on, to blame the white man for their circumstances, right? Even though what's happened in terms of slavery and so on is, long time ago, and it doesn't involve the white people who are here now, and it doesn't involve the black people who are here now. And the problem with that kind of, this is my input, the problem with that kind of thinking of blaming somebody else is there's no end to that. First of all, there's no end to that in terms of ourselves and how much nonsense we can dig up, or how much victim victim victimhood mentality we can dig up, and there seems to be an endless amount of that. But not only that, if we really look at it practically, everybody's been put upon in their ancestors at some, you know, I mean, my background is Irish largely, and if you know, if I can look back and we were starved. When I say we, I mean the ancestors were starved out of Ireland because the English came in and stole all their land and didn't allow them to eat anything but a few potatoes, and the potatoes all got blight. So, what am I supposed to do? Go back and gripe at the English for, my personal individual circumstances today? It doesn't make any sense, right? And this is his point. And he's a black guy, so he comes across, and of course he's attacked as an Uncle Tom and everything, is the typical stuff, right? But I mean, it is so important. And what he talks about is that he actually makes the point that there's no such thing as racism. There's only character. There's no such thing as race. He's talking about from a practical standpoint. There is character. And I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking, you know what? This character thing is akin to that constancy, that soul in a way, right? Because, the impermanent things, we always have to keep putting input in, we have to keep feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding, right? It's like the body. We have to eat today and eat tonight and then defecate tomorrow and then eat and defecate and eat and defecate and eat and defecate. And that's what this guy's talking with, this Ajahn Lee in this book, is that it's sort of a way of looking at what is permanent and what is impermanent. Whereas what he uses as synonym, I think, and there's an equivalency here, the heart. He uses the term the heart. It doesn't mean the physical heart. It's not what I'm getting anyways. You see that show up in other scriptures and so on too throughout, there's the sort of like the body, mind, and the heart, or body, mind, and soul. And these are synonyms, I think. And I think if I was to sit down with this Jesse Lee Peterson, we could probably come to an agreement that there is body, mind, and character. Because what we see here is that once the character is built to a certain foundation, a certain strength, it doesn't need to be fed anymore, because it is what it is. People will stand for certain things. They'll behave in certain ways. So what he talks about, that he lays out quite well what's happened in the black community, is that there has been a concerted effort, in his opinion, to remove the man from the family, right? So what's happened is that you have thousands and thousands of single mothers who are angry at men, raising children to be angry. And he has it in such a way that he uses, God did it, but and so on, but it was the nature of us as human beings for many, many thousands of years to have a nuclear family, right, where men and women complement one another, and that the children actually learn from both. So their character is built from the example of both. But you take one out of the equation, you're left with one, and there's something missing. So what happens is children yearn for their father, and their mothers often make them angry because there's the put downs of the father. So there's this torn identity that is a fractured character. And you have a fractured character, it results in all of the other things. It creates a fractured mind. It creates a fractured body, which gets into all kinds of addictions and abuses of the body. And I think that that's very powerful. I think we can see that through whatever ancient text that we read. We can see it through the importance. Certain texts will talk about the importance of the soul. And soul is like, if you think about it, though it's spelled a little bit different, it's kind of like the one within us, right? The key, the most important aspect of ourselves, that constancy. And, heart, symbolically, it's in the center of our body. And without it, if it stops beating for a few minutes, we're done, right? So symbolically, it's the core of us. It's the core of us. And we even use it in terms of metaphor as well. We say, the heart of the matter, the heart of the subject, the heart of the story is. It's like, what is the central core of importance, right? And the same with character. You know, we talk about people sometimes as that's an interesting character, right? That person has a nice character. They got kind of a strange character, whatever. We're talking about the core aspect of themselves. Not so much, not the body, not the mind. It's kind of like a separate aspect. And I think it's that part of us that's the permanence, or at least can be established as quite permanent and quite predictable. We can see it showing up. And we can see it showing up intergenerational, you know. And once it's kind of set, it doesn't have to be fed every day to show up the same way. Whereas the body especially, yes, and the mind often too, we have this need to be feeding the mind, to read more, to understand more, to learn more, and so on. But it's all built on top of the character, right? Work ethics and so on that come through character. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting, something for us to consider for ourselves. What's our character? I think we can strengthen it and, you know, purify it and so on. And also, I think it's constructive in terms of our understanding of what goes on in the world, what goes on with the people around us and so on. So, hope this is helpful. And I'm not going to try to paraphrase what it is that Jesse Lee Peterson is talking about, but you know what, have a look at what he does. I think he's doing fantastic work, very valuable work, and, you know, character and civilization building work, in other words. So thank you for your work, Jesse Lee Peterson. Steve here again, great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.